At issue this week, growing concerns over the rise in asylum seekers, multiple levels of government sounding the alarm.
We are doing what we can under this financial strain. But do we want to close the doors to refugees? No.
Now, François Legault says the situation in Quebec is near a breaking point. All of it as Ottawa looks at reducing the number of international students. So what's to be done about the level of asylum seekers entering Canada? Can Ottawa do anything to ease the burden of non-permanent residents on provinces and municipalities? I'm Rosemary Barton. Let's bring in our panelists to break it down tonight. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, Althea Raj, and Jason Markusoff joins us from Calgary tonight. Good to see you all. Chantal, Ottawa has obviously pointed to some of the things that they've done in Quebec in particular. In Quebec, they closed Roxham Road, and in Toronto, they've also offered additional funding. What did you make of Legault's letter and what's going on here?
Okay, a number of things. Legault's complaints are not new, but they do refer to a situation that has been becoming increasingly difficult to manage between Toronto and Montreal, and the reasons for that are Pearson Airport and Trudeau Airport. The Quebec and Ontario have been receiving the bulk of asylum seekers. The numbers have been going up at a time when there is a housing crisis in both Toronto and Montreal, and most of the people who do land and seek asylum are bound to stay in Montreal and Toronto. And you see both Legault using the hook of this debate that has now expanded beyond Quebec's borders to say, gee, we have an issue, and the solution is not international students, to tell you the truth. It's social services, it's schools, go down the list. There is no way that the City of Montreal has the capacity to offer help to, it's not even a money issue at this point. It's also a housing issue. The same is true in Toronto. I think both Legault and Chow are playing the same political game, i.e. they are hitting the Liberals where it hurts electorally. Montreal and Toronto are also the last pillars of the Liberal coalition that brought Justin Trudeau to power. But I also note that there has been a general shift in the debate on immigration this week. Pierre Poilievre was in Quebec and he was saying, I'm going to limit immigration numbers to match our capacity to build housing. That is new. That's the Conservatives stepping out of a consensus and taking a risk. It's no surprise that happened in Quebec, because this is the province where immigration has been debated most over the past few years.
And to be clear, though, that the strain that we're talking about is non-permanent residents, international students, asylum seekers, and others. What do you think about this debate that we're having around immigration at this time, Andrew, and where it's going?
Well, it's metastasizing, and Chantal emphasized, at least in the first part of her remarks, the legitimate issue that's at stake here, and there are legitimate issues. Maybe I'll put a little bit more emphasis on the politics of this.
Yes.
You've got a government that's at 25% in the polls. You've got an issue that's achieved kind of escape velocity, and for politicians at other levels of government and other jurisdictions, it's a good time to be piling on. You can raise your complaint and have the government's attention in a hurry in a way you might not have if they were riding higher in the polls and if the issue had not achieved quite the same salience. And yes, a big part of it, not all of it, but a big part of it is money. It may be money for good purposes, but it's money.
Sure.
So yeah, it's a good time to pile on the federal government right now.
Althea?
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit last week, but I think the debate, the consensus around immigration is fraying, and it is around, at least publicly, it is around the capacity issue that Chantal was talking about in terms of not having, classes, teachers, doctors, emergency room capacity in hospitals. Do we have the capacity to welcome as many people as are coming in our country with open arms in the way that we would like to welcome them? And so it has changed from being kind of like an ethnic or a concern about certain types of people coming to the country as opposed to our ability to welcome them, which I think is a much more comfortable position for a lot of Canadians. Pierre Poilievre did not say what he said in Quebec for the first time this week. He actually made those comments before Christmas, but I think they kind of got lost because it was the holidays. But I feel like it is an argument that is gaining a lot of strength. And it's not just around asylum seekers, which a lot of people do fairly or unfairly blame the federal government because it's been so publicized and so associated with the Trudeau government. In the same way that, you could point the blame at how they've expanded temporary foreign workers in this country. I mean, Quebec is a bit different because they have more control over that. International students. There's a lot of things that you could say that the federal government could have taken the steps on the Mexican visas, for example. In 2016, they decided to get rid of the Mexican visas. Maybe it's time to put them back. But when you have stories that say things like, we're welcoming all these international students who actually a significant chunk of them are not actually even going to school. They're basically using it as a loophole to get permanent residency in this country and working while they are here. That's not what the program is intended to be. That is the federal government's fault at the end of the day. And people are right to blame the government. And again, it speaks to that issue that we've been talking about for like a year, which is, can the federal Liberals actually govern properly? And they seem to have very little interest in governing. And this is one of those issues that if they don't get this right, I think it could really hurt them and hurt that consensus in Canada.
Jason.
And I mean, it's remarkable how it's at every level of immigration where things are bursting or expanding beyond where they have before. Not just the the program immigration, family reunification, and skilled worker programs. It is the temporary workers, which we've been talking about. It's the international students, which we've been talking about. It's the asylum seekers. And the challenge with the asylum seeker situation is there's some degree of control, direct control Canada can have over the number of people they let in as temporary foreign workers, or as international students, or even program refugees. When somebody gets to the airport or gets to another port and declares asylum in the country, whether on a student visa or traveler visa, you can't say no. This is requirement. Yes, they closed down Roxham Road, but even so, this was by November, it was already a record year for asylum seekers. In fact, it was higher than it was in 2018 and 2019 combined when the whole Roxham Road debate was really exploding. So there's nothing that the government can do to limit that. All they can do is now have this debate with the jurisdictions that are required to house them and host them on this. And regarding Poilievre, I would note that Poilievre is responding. He's not leading this debate. He's responding to a great change in public opinion on this issue, that people are concerned about what this means for Canada's economic capacity.
Yeah, and I would also say about his position, I'm not really sure what it means other than saying we're going to attach a housing build to how many people we let in. It's a chicken and the egg thing. I'm not sure he's explained exactly how that would work. Chantal?
Yeah.
But it is a way to rationalize a promise to lower the number of immigrants that come to this country in the name of something other than they're stealing our jobs or they're not the people we want. Yeah. I don't totally agree with the notion that the federal government is powerless to cut down on asylum seekers. I don't think Stephen Harper imposed visas on Mexicans who wanted to come to Canada because he doesn't like Mexico. There was an issue there. And that is something the federal government is allowed and can do and is apparently under pressure from the Biden administration to do.
I was remembering an interview I did about a year ago with Secretary Mayorkas, where he was asking Canada to do this very thing a year ago. Last word to you on this, Andrew.
Just a couple of things. First of all, Roxham Road was closed. Apparently, that didn't solve the problem, as we were assured it would. Secondly, look, the problems in housing and productivity long predate the surge in population growth we've had in the last couple of years. Now, maybe it's exacerbated, but if all we do is we cut back on immigration and we don't fix the problems in housing policy and in investment policy, we won't have solved any problems at all. It'll just be a Band-Aid solution that doesn't fix anything.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. When we come back, though, we're going to take a look at the political battle over Alberta's power grid. A very cold winter, as Jason can attest, forcing Albertans to limit their electricity use, with the province placing the blame on green energy. What's to be made of Alberta's power grid woes? That's next. Alberta's battle with Ottawa over energy got real this week after a brutal cold snap tested the province's own electric grid. Albertans were asked to turn off the lights. The province used it as a chance to criticize the federal government's focus on renewables and its promise of a net zero grid by 2035.
It wasn't ideological that the sun goes down at 4:55 before the peak. It wasn't ideological that the wind wasn't blowing or it was minus 30 and they couldn't turn. It was just a reality of a northern climate. So we need natural gas.
So what's been made of Alberta's power grid woes? Can cold weather change public opinion? Let's bring everybody back. Chantal, Andrew, Althea, and Jason. Jason, you start us off because you had to suffer in the dark over the weekend or limited light. Do you think that this is working for the Alberta government to blame the federal government for where it's trying to go when it's trying to manage its own energy needs?
I mean, they put out these ads, and I'm sure a lot of Torontonians and Ottawans and other people in Canada saw these, that no one wants to freeze in the dark. Well, it's well before the 2035 net zero timeline for Ottawa. And last Saturday, Alberta, 11 years before that, was almost freezing in the dark. They had these risk of rolling brownouts, this emergency alert on our phone to tell us all to shut down. And it was, it was a period where solar and wind at night on a cold night were not blowing, and that's not a surprise. Any electricity expert, even the officials there, would say this was expected. Natural gas was supposed to be carrying the freight here. In the 2035 net zero plan for Ottawa, they talk about peakers, these plants that you keep on, even if you're not using much natural gas for much of the time, you keep on as backstop, as emergency or when it's extreme. There'll be reasonable debates between parties on whether the allowances in the net zero plan are enough, but that's not the kind of the nuance we're going to hear a lot from the Alberta government leaders. They'll be talking about, we can't just rely on wind and solar fully, but the other reality is that this happened in 2024, not 2035. There are a lot of questions for Alberta as to why it was the only province or major jurisdiction in the West where this occurred, even though everybody was under this big deep freeze, and that has to do with a lot of issues with its own electricity system design, which, to their credit, they have been talking about figuring out.
No one has to know as much about Alberta's grid as Jason. That's why he's here. But you all know as much. You all know plenty about politics and the way Alberta's using this, and whether there is a vulnerability here, Althea, for the Liberals.
I was actually impressed that the Liberals didn't take the bait that I think that Danielle Smith and Scott Moe were kind of hanging out for them. They kind of took the high road on this one. This is an issue where I think, depending on your perspective, it colors the way you view this whole thing. And if you read the letters to the editors and newspapers or columns across the country, different ideological publications, you will get a sense of that. If you think that what Danielle Smith, you support her challenge using the Alberta Sovereignty Act to fight Ottawa's clean regulations, you probably view what happened over the weekend as a proof that we should not go the way of more clean energy. We need more natural gas, and that's the way to get out of this. If you think that Scott Moe and Danielle Smith in their a parade towards fossil fuel dependence are living in some sort of cave, you probably view and take glee at noting that because it started to be more windy on Monday, things turned. And then, in fact, solar and wind did play a part this week in helping turn the tide. So it is interesting the way people position themselves. I think people who do actually study this issue will tell you that you actually need an array, a buffet of energy options to make sure that this doesn't happen. And I did think it was interesting that Stephen Guilbeault's office, the federal environment minister's office, took great pains to note that in the clean regs, there is a note that you can actually use fossil burning energy sources that don't have carbon capture in periods of peak and in deep necessity. So hopefully we can look at this incident and not politicize it, but it is Canada, and obviously it will be. But it is interesting, and I think what Jason is talking about is really where the focus should be, which is why is Alberta in this mess, and what will it do to get out of it? Because there's many different parts of it, and it has a very unique energy grid, unlike the other provinces.
But I did
private
Chantal
energy grid.
see Pierre Poilievre also on, must have been Friday, blaming the Prime Minister for the bad weather in Winnipeg at the time, Andrew, and also for the carbon tax because then people can't heat their homes. Like you can see how a political argument flows from this cold weather and the renewables and the rest of it. You can see where they're going there.
But maybe it's Andrew's fault that it was cold in Winnipeg. For all we know, I mean,
I'm okay with that. Yeah.
If one person can cause this cold weather, why not Andrew?
That's right.
Why pick on someone else if you can pick on him? Seriously, I'm not even going to go into the grid, the net zero.
No.
I'm just going to say what this week illustrated is that at this point, and with the current players in place in Ottawa and in Alberta and Saskatchewan, we are not on the verge of an adult conversation about where we go from here. And there is something very childish about saying in 2024, see, this is what they want to do to us in 2035 without explaining how come it's happening to us now when we're not even doing this.
Yeah.
So there is no profound analysis to be had about where this goes in the real world.
Andrew, given that you're to blame for everything, you can go last here.
Naturally, I accept full responsibility, but I blame my staff. Look, I'm just a simple country journalist, but I'm having a hard time understanding how a brownout or whatever you want to call it in 2024 can be blamed on clean electricity regulations that don't get applied. It's a classic case of shifting the blame. The problems in the Alberta regulatory structure are the problems of the provincial governments doing or not doing, and it takes some chutzpah to blame it on the federal government. Now, does that mean the clean electricity regulations are well considered or well drafted or well thought out? No. There's a lot of reasons to think that they are overly prescriptive, overly intrusive, and may indeed in the future, when they apply fully, might indeed cut things too close to the bone in terms of not giving enough slack in the system to be able to take up these kinds of crises. So yeah, there's good reasons for the federal government to rethink it, not that they will. I mean, the point, I'll say this one more time, is carbon pricing is the necessary and sufficient condition for inducing people to make shifts away from fossil fuels and towards cleaner energy. It helps if the provincial government were not, quote unquote, pausing renewables, which is also makes it weird to be blaming renewables for this. So this is classic provincial politics in direction. Blame the feds for everything, every sparrow that falls.
30 seconds to you, Jason, to wrap it up on the politics of it.
It's going to be political forever. Danielle Smith. No, it is. I mean, Danielle Smith. It's actually funny that she happens to be on vacation this week, and it was her ministers, who maybe didn't amp it up to the same degree of 11 that she did. But she returns next week, and I'm sure we'll hear plenty about this. Because I think, while Andrew's right that it's not, this is not directly Ottawa's fault now, I think the messaging could well be that this is a premonition of the future. This is the situation now, as energy demand from electrification of vehicles and heat pumps and so much more increases, and there are restrictions on natural gas. Imagine how common the shock would be come 2035.
Well, at least we now know who to email about the bad weather. It's just directly to Andrew. It doesn't have to be anybody else. That's wonderful. We have to take a short break here, but when we return, we'll talk about Rachel Notley stepping down as leader of the NDP. That's next.
I'm here today to announce that I will not be leading Alberta's NDP into the next election.
Rachel Notley is stepping down as leader of the Alberta NDP. Notley had been leader of the party for the last 11 years. She became premier in 2015 and made the party a real contender in the province. So what will Notley's political legacy be in Alberta? Well, will the Alberta NDP be able to survive without her? Let's bring everybody back. Chantal, Andrew, Althea, and Jason. I know I started with Jason on the last one, but I feel like we kind of have to start with him again. But he wrote about it as well. So we'll start with you again, Jason. Do you think that and we'll put this to everyone, but do you think that the party is in good enough shape without Rachel Notley, or is it the party of Rachel Notley and now the NDP is in trouble?
I mean, this is the big question determining whether Alberta returns to its one-party state status. Conservative, that it was up until Rachel Notley rose to power, and in her first try as leader formed government in a set of very lucky circumstances. The NDP party itself does not tend to poll very well in popularity, but Rachel Notley always has. She's always been ahead of her party. She's been ahead most of the time of the leaders that she's faced, Jason Kenney and Danielle Smith, these two towering other figures of conservative politics. So this is the big question. Can this party's in healthy shape? They have 38 of 87 MLAs in office in the legislature. That's the largest opposition in Alberta history. But how much of that is owing to her? How much of it is how much of her leaving will enable them to say, leave the legacy of the recession that was under her leadership, or the perceived cozier ties she had with Justin Trudeau. Can they move beyond that with a new leader? And it's going to be quite a race shaping up from former cabinet ministers and current MLAs to do that. This will be the giant question over this party, and anybody who's confident as to which way it goes might not really understand Alberta politics.
I mean, I think you would, as an Albertan, I would think you would want some variety in political parties. I'm not sure it serves anyone to have just one party in power for decades and decades. Perhaps Conservatives will disagree with me, but Chantal.
That was very Ontarian of you. And I'm guessing,
from Winnipeg too, for the record.
Okay, nice try. I'm guessing, and looking at it from this distance, that there is also a lot of interest into what happens next to Rachel Notley. Now, the one thing we do know for sure is she's not going to be running for Jagmeet Singh. Why do we know that? Because her first achievement was getting the Trans Mountain Pipeline completed, which the NDP federally opposed. And again, you have an NDP premier, fairly successful at leading her party, looking at larger challenges that may come her way, as they did for Gary Doer, Stephen Lewis, Bob Ray, Ujjal Desange, to parties or to prime ministers other than the federal NDP. And that break was never more obvious than thinking about where would Rachel Notley land? And for sure, you would want her to land somewhere in the federal landscape, doing something. I'm not saying necessarily running.
No. There is an appetite for NDP ideas, though, I would say, in Manitoba, traditionally in Saskatchewan, Alberta, BC. I mean, you can see how the party could still exist in Alberta, Althea.
Well, the party will still exist in Alberta. It's just, will it be as successful as it was under Rachel Notley? And the answer to that is, I don't know. She casts a very large shadow on the party. And to Jason's point, what's encouraging is that there are a lot of people who seem to want that job. So that's always a good sign. But a little bit like, when Justin Trudeau eventually leaves, whenever that is, of the Liberal Party, people will write about, what is the Liberal Party without Justin Trudeau? And, how will that new leader take it? To Chantal's point, because I think it's worth noting, if she spoke French, she would be the lead name on everybody's lips in this town to replace Justin Trudeau. She has a huge fan club among federal Liberals, especially, I would say, backbench Liberal MPs, and who actually, look at her record in Alberta and think about all the things that the federal Liberals did that basically, followed in her footsteps. I mean, if she had not been the premier in Alberta, to Chantal's point, I don't know that Justin Trudeau would have approved the Trans Mountain Pipeline. Her carbon pricing plan led the way for the federal government's carbon pricing plan. So her legacy looms large, much larger than just its impact on Alberta politics, which is quite substantial, that the NDP is now like a real force in Alberta politics, and that progressive voters in that province have a party that has a chance of winning to vote for.
All good points. Last word to you, Andrew.
Well, to answer your question more or less the same way Althea did, I don't know. It'll depend upon what the party does next, who it chooses as leader, what choices they make, et cetera. I would only say there's no reason why it can't. She leaves them in very strong shape. She lost the last election with a higher percentage of the popular vote than she got when she won the election in 2015. So 44% is an all-time high for the NDP in Alberta. So that, you would think, establishes you as a pretty formidable force going forward. You've got a province that's very different in terms of its ethnic and urban profile than it would have been 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
It is, I think, much more open to the possibilities of two-party government rather than one party. She was more popular than her party was, a little bit like Bob Rae in Ontario, more moderate, more appealing to the centrist voter than the party would be. And the party should be mindful of that if they're still of a mind to wanting to contend for government. I agree with Althea, she would be a better fit with the federal Liberals than the federal NDP. That's unfortunate because you'd think if an NDPer can win in Alberta, she could win in a lot of places, but I don't think she could win her own party if she were to try to win the leadership of the federal NDP. So if she is interested in federal politics, it would be more likely in the Liberal Party than the NDP, but I have no idea whether she has any interest whatever.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate you all being here, and especially to you, Jason, for coming in. Thanks.